It was a quiet, warm afternoon, the kind of day when everything felt slow and calm. The streets were empty, except for a few cars parked along the sides, and the sun reflected off the windows of small shops, giving the city a peaceful glow. She had decided to take a short break from her busy schedule. Normally, her life was full of constant meetings, reports, and careful planning, but today she wanted to enjoy a few moments of peace. She drove her car to a small, familiar parking lot near a local cafe, planning to grab a coffee and maybe read a few pages of a book she had been meaning to finish. She was careful and thoughtful, always aware of her surroundings, a habit that had been drilled into her over years of demanding work. Even in moments of calm, she never let her guard down. As she parked her car and stepped out, she felt the warmth of the sun on her face and took a deep breath, enjoying the quiet for a moment. The birds chirped softly and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of nearby trees. It was exactly the kind of moment she cherished after long hours of intense work. She smiled to herself, thinking about the small pleasures that often went unnoticed in the rush of life. Then she noticed a police car slowly moving toward her. It wasn't unusual to see law enforcement in the area, but something about the way the car slowed down caught her attention. The officer behind the wheel kept staring at her, a look that didn't feel right. It was one of those moments when instinct tells you that something is off, and her instincts had been honed to perfection over years of careful observation. The car stopped a few feet away from her, and the officer stepped out. He was a large man, with a confident air that suggested he was used to people following his orders without question. But there was something else in his expression, a hint of prejudice, something old and careless, as if he assumed he had the right to judge anyone he saw. He started walking toward her, his steps slow but deliberate, as though trying to intimidate her without saying a word. She noticed the way he looked at her, the way he scrutinized her face and posture. He seemed surprised that she didn't show fear, that she didn't flinch or hesitate. "Afternoon," he said, his voice carrying an edge that didn't belong in a casual greeting. There was a subtle note of condescension, as if he was testing her reaction. She responded politely, nodding slightly and keeping her voice calm. She knew that any sudden reaction could escalate the situation, so she focused on maintaining control, both of her body and her words. Her calmness didn't come from fear, it came from experience. She had faced tense situations before, though rarely like this in public. This was different. This was personal, though he didn't know it yet. He took a step closer and spoke again, his tone sharper this time. "What are you doing around here?" he asked, as if he had the right to question her presence. There was no urgency, no reason behind his question, only a sense of entitlement. She answered politely, keeping her response simple and clear. "I'm just here to get some coffee," she said, her voice steady and confident. She didn't add anything more because she knew that talking too much could give him a sense of power. He wanted a reaction, and she was determined not to give him one. The officer squinted at her, his eyes narrowing as if her answer was not enough. He leaned slightly, trying to assert dominance through body language, but she didn't move. She didn't flinch. Her stance was relaxed, but her eyes were sharp, scanning the environment, noting every detail. She knew that staying aware was important, not just for her safety, but to understand the mindset of the man in front of her. It was clear that he had made an assumption based on her appearance, and assumptions like that often led to trouble. She could sense it in the way he spoke, the way he looked at her, and the subtle tension that grew between them. He continued, trying to push boundaries. "You know, people like you shouldn't be wandering around here alone," he said, his voice low, meant to intimidate. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she took a small step back toward her car, not in fear, but to maintain distance and control. She wanted him to know that she was aware, alert, and not easily shaken. Her mind worked quickly, thinking of every possible scenario, weighing each response carefully. She was trained for situations like this, though she hoped it wouldn't escalate further. She had the skills and the knowledge to handle it, but she also knew that confrontation in public could have consequences for both of them. The officer's expression hardened. He seemed confused, frustrated even, that she wasn't reacting the way he expected. Most people in his mind would have shown some sign of discomfort or fear. But she remained calm, her face composed, her voice neutral, her eyes steady. There was a quiet confidence in her demeanor that unsettled him. He wasn't used to being met with composure in situations where he expected control. He tried again, leaning slightly closer and speaking in a more forceful tone. "What's your name?" he demanded. It wasn't a question for information. It was a challenge, a way to assert authority. She considered her options carefully. Giving her real identity could escalate things unnecessarily, but she also wanted to maintain honesty within safe limits. "I'd rather not give my name right now," she said calmly. Her words were firm but polite, designed to set boundaries without provoking anger. He frowned, clearly irritated by her refusal to comply, and stepped even closer. The tension grew, and the small parking lot seemed suddenly charged with unease. She noticed a few bystanders glancing their way, sensing the uncomfortable interaction, but no one intervened. The silence of the street made the situation feel more intense, more personal. The officer's attempts at intimidation became more obvious. He used his size, his posture, and his tone to try to make her feel small, to make her feel unsafe, but she didn't respond in the way he expected. Her calmness was deliberate. She was analyzing him, noting every movement, every word, every flicker of emotion. She knew that panic or aggression could escalate things quickly. Instead, she stood her ground, a quiet force of confidence in the middle of a tense situation. Inside, she reflected on the absurdity of the encounter. It was a reminder that prejudice and ignorance were still present, even in the modern world. Yet she didn't let anger take over. She had learned that anger often clouds judgment, while patience and observation bring clarity. She decided to gather information, to document the encounter subtly so that there would be a record if things went further. She reached for her phone in a natural way, making sure it was discreet, her movements calm and unnoticeable. The officer noticed the slight movement, but didn't react immediately. He seemed unsure, caught between his confidence and the realization that this woman wasn't responding as he anticipated. His steps faltered, his voice wavered slightly, and a subtle shift in his posture betrayed the tension he had tried to hide. She noticed it, understanding that she had already begun to regain the upper hand through sheer composure and awareness. The moment stretched. The sun shone down, the birds continued to sing, and the city seemed to hold its breath as the silent battle of observation and control continued. She took a deep breath, keeping her mind sharp, her senses alert. She didn't know what would happen next, but she was prepared. She had faced danger in many forms before, and she knew that staying calm, clear-headed, and observant was her greatest strength. The officer, on the other hand, seemed increasingly unsure, his confidence shaken by the very composure he had sought to intimidate. Finally, she made a subtle decision. She would not react hastily. She would continue to maintain her calm, to gather information and to ensure her own safety. This encounter was a test, not just of courage but of patience, intelligence, and awareness. She knew that sometimes letting a person underestimate you could be more powerful than confronting them immediately. She smiled slightly to herself, knowing that the real challenge had just begun, and that the situation could change quickly, depending on how carefully it was handled. She stayed where she was, calm, poised, and alert. The cop, unaware of who he was dealing with, continued his attempts to assert control, each word and movement revealing more about his assumptions and biases. She watched, listened, and prepared, knowing that the next moments would be crucial. The quiet afternoon had turned into a delicate game of observation and restraint, a test of wit, courage, and professionalism. And she was ready for it every step of the way, fully aware that her training and experience had prepared her for moments exactly like this. The officer's eyes narrowed as he stood in front of her, clearly frustrated that she hadn't shown any sign of fear or discomfort. He shuffled his feet slightly, trying to appear confident, but the uncertainty in his stance betrayed him. He leaned forward, his voice dropping into a low, forceful tone. "Do you know you're making this difficult?" he said, as if she were doing something wrong simply by existing in that space. She looked at him calmly, her expression neutral, almost gentle, but there was a sharpness in her eyes that made it clear she was alert. "I'm not doing anything wrong," she replied evenly. Her voice carried no anger, no threat, just clarity. It was that clarity that made him pause for a moment, as if he hadn't expected her to answer so firmly without flinching. He took a step closer, trying to use his physical presence to intimidate her. "You think you can just stand there and ignore me?" he asked, his words carrying a mix of challenge and irritation. She didn't move back. Instead, she shifted slightly, positioning herself to maintain space while keeping her body relaxed and her hands visible. She was trained to handle situations like this, to manage both risk and perception, and she knew that any sudden movement could escalate things unnecessarily. As he continued to approach, she subtly reached for her phone in her pocket, ensuring it was ready to record without making it obvious. Her movements were slow, deliberate, natural, as if adjusting her bag or checking a message. The officer's attention was mostly on her face, and he didn't notice her preparation. She took in his every movement, his tone, the way he gestured, and even the small details like the way his eyes shifted when he was frustrated. She cataloged everything mentally, understanding that it could be useful later. "You know," he said, his voice becoming sharper, "you really shouldn't be acting like this. People will think you're hiding something." The words dripped with a kind of condescension, the assumption that she was guilty simply because she didn't behave like he expected. She let a small smile play across her lips, not because she was amused, but because she was aware of how predictable his behavior had become. She had seen this pattern before, people trying to assert control when they felt threatened by someone who wouldn't yield. "I have nothing to hide," she said quietly, but firmly. "I'm just trying to enjoy my afternoon." Her tone carried a calm certainty, and it was clear that she wasn't inviting further confrontation, but she wasn't backing down either. The officer's frustration grew. He seemed to struggle with the fact that she wasn't reacting in the way he expected. Most people would have shown some sign of discomfort or anxiety by now. But she remained composed, almost serene, as if the situation didn't affect her at all. He took another step closer, a little too quickly, and she instinctively adjusted her stance to maintain balance and distance. Every small movement she made was calculated to appear natural while keeping her safe. "You're really testing me," he said, his voice now tinged with annoyance. She didn't reply, letting the silence do part of the work. Her calmness was her strategy. It unnerved him further, because he wasn't used to people refusing to react to his authority. He had expected submission, a hint of fear, maybe even an apology for being in his space. None of that happened. She was neutral, calm, and present, and that made him unsure of what to do next. As the tension grew, a few people nearby began to notice the interaction. A couple of pedestrians slowed their pace, curious about the confrontation. She remained aware of them, understanding that public attention could be a factor in how the officer behaved, but she also stayed focused on the immediate situation. She was trained to observe without drawing unnecessary attention to herself, maintaining control while still being fully aware of her surroundings. The officer's voice rose slightly. "You need to answer my questions," he said, the demand almost spilling over into aggression. She remained still, her eyes locked on his, calm and unshaken. "I've already answered," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "I'm here for coffee. That's all." The frustration in his eyes was visible. He seemed at a loss, unsure how to proceed. His attempts to intimidate were failing, and he hadn't expected resistance delivered with such quiet confidence. She noticed a subtle shift in his posture, a small step back, a slight hesitation, and she realized she had begun to reclaim control simply by not giving in. Inside, she reflected on the nature of prejudice and authority. It was clear that the officer had made assumptions based on her appearance and demeanor. He thought he could assert dominance over her because of her race and perhaps her gender, believing that fear or compliance would follow. But she wasn't the person to be intimidated easily. Years of training, field experience, and personal discipline had prepared her for situations exactly like this. She kept her phone partially hidden, recording the encounter carefully. Her movements were discreet, almost imperceptible, but she ensured that every word and gesture was captured. She didn't want to escalate the situation further, but she wanted a record of the interaction. It wasn't just about proving a point. It was about accountability, and she knew that documenting behavior could be essential. The officer, sensing that he was losing control, attempted another tactic. "You think you're smart, don't you?" he asked, his tone a mixture of anger and disbelief. She didn't answer immediately, allowing the pause to speak volumes. Her calm demeanor, her refusal to react with anger or fear, was already sending a message stronger than words could convey. She finally said, "I'm aware, and I expect the same from everyone else. Respect goes both ways." Her response seemed to momentarily confuse him. He had expected either fear or confrontation, but instead, she gave him an observation, a simple truth delivered without aggression. He fumbled for a moment, unsure how to respond. The tension in the air was palpable, like a quiet storm waiting to break. Every detail mattered. The small twitch in his hand, the shift in his weight, the way he looked around as if seeking validation or support. She noticed everything, cataloging it silently. The pedestrians watching the scene felt the change too. The dynamic had shifted. It was no longer a simple attempt at intimidation. It had become a quiet test of patience and awareness. She had taken control without saying much, simply by being calm, observant, and composed. The officer's aggressive energy began to wane, replaced by uncertainty and a subtle self-consciousness. She allowed herself a moment to reflect, understanding the power of presence. Sometimes the simplest actions or lack of reaction can be more powerful than confrontation. She was demonstrating that authority was not just about who could shout or move faster. It was about awareness, control, and intelligence. She was a living example of that principle, and the officer was realizing it slowly, piece by piece. The officer, trying to regain control, adjusted his tone, attempting to appear professional while still asserting authority. "I need to know who you are," he said, his voice measured but still carrying an edge. She didn't move or flinch. She simply replied, "I've given you my reason for being here. That is all you need to know for now." Her words were calm, deliberate, and firm. A silence fell over the small parking lot. The sun continued to shine, birds continued to chirp, and the city hummed around them, but in that space, time seemed to slow. Every movement, every breath, every glance was amplified. She stayed poised, fully aware of the delicate balance she maintained between being calm and being prepared. The officer's attempts to intimidate were weakening with every moment that she refused to react the way he expected. She took a small, deliberate breath, letting it flow naturally, showing no sign of anxiety or fear. She knew that composure was her greatest tool. It was not just about physical presence. It was about mental clarity and quiet strength. The officer was beginning to realize that he was not in control, that his assumptions and attempts to dominate were failing. Inwardly, she prepared for the next phase. She knew that the situation could escalate, and she needed to be ready to act if necessary. Her mind ran through possible scenarios, weighing risks and responses, but she remained outwardly calm and natural. Her body language, her tone, her gaze, all communicated confidence and awareness without aggression. She had turned the situation into a game of observation and subtle control, and she intended to maintain that advantage until the right moment arrived. The officer, sensing the shift, became more cautious. He still spoke, still moved, but there was a hesitation, a subtle recognition that his attempts were not working as he had planned. The quiet strength of the woman standing before him was altering the dynamic. He was no longer fully in command. She had begun to assert her own presence in a way that could not be ignored or dismissed. The air between them was tense, yet composed. She remained calm, poised, and fully aware of the moment, letting him see that she was not afraid, not submissive, and not reactive in the way he had expected. She had turned what could have been a simple intimidation into a test of awareness, patience, and composure, and she had already won small victories simply by standing firm and observing carefully. The officer's frustration was growing. He had tried multiple ways to assert control, yet she remained calm, steady, and unshaken. His attempts at intimidation, verbal challenges, and body language were all failing, and he could feel it. That quiet, unwavering presence of hers was unsettling in a way he had not anticipated. He took a deep breath, trying to regain composure, but it was clear he was aware that his authority in the moment was slipping. She sensed his uncertainty and decided it was the right moment to reveal more, not in anger, not in threat, but in the kind, clear, and authoritative way that would stop any further intimidation. She squared her shoulders slightly and spoke, her voice calm but firm. "I am an FBI agent. This is my identity, and I expect professional respect from everyone, including law enforcement officers." Her words were simple, direct, and deliberate, but the impact was immediate. The officer's eyes widened, and for a moment he froze, caught between disbelief and confusion. He had expected compliance, fear, or at least some nervous hesitation. None of that had happened. Now, confronted with a truth that shattered his assumptions, he was visibly rattled. His hands shifted slightly, almost nervously, as if trying to regain a physical foothold in a situation that had slipped beyond his control. She remained composed, standing tall, her eyes meeting his without anger but with undeniable authority. There was no room for argument. No need for explanation beyond what she had said. The confidence in her tone and posture carried the weight of her experience, her training, and her authority. She had faced danger many times before, and every muscle and instinct in her body was honed for control, calmness, and precision. This was no different. You need to understand, she continued, her voice softening slightly to a calm professional tone, that harassment or intimidation of any person, especially based on race or appearance, is unacceptable. I am documenting this interaction, and it will be reviewed. The officer swallowed, his mouth slightly dry, his previous aggression replaced by unease. He tried to maintain a neutral expression, but it was clear he was struggling to reconcile the authority he had once assumed with the reality standing in front of him. He opened his mouth, attempted to speak, then hesitated. His words faltered as he realized that she held the power in the moment, not through aggression but through calm, professional, undeniable authority. Around them, bystanders began to notice the shift. The tension in the air was palpable, but so was the sudden respect that radiated from her. She was not loud, she was not aggressive, but she had taken complete control of the situation simply by stating the truth and maintaining composure. It was a powerful lesson in calm confidence. People watching understood, even if only subconsciously, that she was in command without raising her voice or threatening anyone. The officer attempted to regain composure, straightening his back and adjusting his posture, but it was clear he had lost the psychological battle. He tried again, speaking in a measured tone. I didn't realize. I wasn't aware. His voice trailed off, hesitant and unsure. She didn't interrupt him. She allowed him a moment to collect his thoughts, understanding that he needed to process what he had just learned. There was no need for confrontation. The truth had already shifted the dynamic entirely. She continued to observe him carefully, noting his reactions, his small gestures, and his breathing. Everything revealed his state of mind. The arrogance, the assumptions, and the intended intimidation were now replaced by an awkward self-consciousness. She remained silent for a few moments, letting the tension settle while keeping her stance open and approachable. It was a delicate balance. She wanted to assert authority without unnecessary aggression, to educate without conflict, and to maintain control while allowing him to save face. Finally, the officer spoke again, this time quieter, almost sheepish. I didn't know. I shouldn't have. He trailed off again, unable to finish the sentence, clearly grappling with the realization of his behavior. She nodded slightly, acknowledging his words but not celebrating them. Her goal was not humiliation. It was accountability, awareness, and the correction of assumptions. She explained further, her tone professional but firm. Every interaction like this has consequences. Your assumptions and behavior could have escalated the situation dangerously. Awareness and respect are essential, regardless of your position. I expect you to take that seriously. Her voice carried the weight of authority, experience, and intelligence. She was not threatening. She was instructing, guiding, and making it clear that there were expectations for conduct. The officer looked around, noticing the subtle attention of passers-by. He realized that the encounter had shifted from a private attempt at intimidation to a public display of accountability. He seemed to shrink slightly under the weight of her calm authority and the awareness that others were watching. The silence hung for a moment, tense but no longer aggressive, filled instead with the unspoken recognition of the truth. She was in control, not through fear but through professionalism. She continued, making her intentions clear. I am documenting this interaction for official records. Your actions will be reviewed and appropriate measures will be taken if necessary. This is not personal, but it is important that all officers understand the responsibility they carry. Her words were deliberate, precise, and unambiguous. She did not raise her voice, she did not threaten, but she made it abundantly clear that the situation would be addressed professionally and thoroughly. The officer nodded slowly, still shaken but beginning to grasp the gravity of his behavior. He cleared his throat and muttered something under his breath, more to himself than to her. She didn't respond. She simply maintained her stance, calm and poised, demonstrating the quiet power of professionalism over aggression. She understood that lessons learned through calm authority often had a greater impact than those imposed through fear or confrontation. As she spoke, she noticed a few small details in his demeanor, the slight tremor in his hands, the way his eyes shifted away momentarily, the tightness in his jaw. Each small gesture was a window into his realization, his recognition that he had misjudged her and that his behavior had been inappropriate. She maintained a careful balance between observation and engagement, allowing him to process without pushing further. Finally, she stepped slightly back, giving him space to regain composure and signaling that the confrontation was concluding. "You should reflect on this experience," she said calmly. "Understanding and respect are not optional. They are essential in every interaction, especially in public service." Her words carried weight, not through volume but through authority, calm, and clarity. The officer's posture relaxed slightly, the tension easing as he realized that the immediate threat of confrontation was over. Yet the lesson had been delivered clearly and effectively. He had been confronted with a truth he could not ignore, a presence and authority he could not dismiss, and a professionalism he could not outmatch. He had learned silently and unmistakably that assumptions and prejudice could be overturned by calm awareness and experience. She turned slightly, acknowledging the people who had watched the encounter, though not in a showy way, simply with a composed and professional nod. Her actions had demonstrated courage, intelligence, and calm authority. She had not sought attention, but she had commanded respect through the quiet strength of her presence. The officer, now subdued and reflective, stepped back, no longer trying to assert control. His voice had lost the previous edge, replaced by an uncertain but respectful tone. She had made her point without anger, without escalation, and without unnecessary confrontation. The public lesson had been delivered subtly but powerfully. Professionalism, calm, and awareness outweigh assumptions, prejudice, and intimidation. As the moment settled, she prepared to leave. Her phone was safely in her pocket, the recording complete. She had documented the encounter, maintained her composure, and asserted her authority without aggression. She knew that this encounter would stay with the officer, not as a humiliation, but as a lesson in respect, awareness, and accountability. She walked toward her car slowly, keeping her movements natural and relaxed, aware that every action still mattered. The officer remained still for a moment, watching her go, processing the event with a newfound awareness of his behavior and the consequences it could have carried. He had faced someone who refused to yield to intimidation, someone whose calm authority had overturned his assumptions and asserted accountability without confrontation. As she drove away, the city returned to its usual rhythm. Cars passed, people walked by, and the afternoon sun continued to shine. Yet the encounter left a lingering impression, not of fear or anger, but of respect for a presence that demanded it through professionalism, clarity, and quiet strength. She knew that this was just one moment in a life filled with challenges, but it was a reminder that integrity and calm authority could triumph over prejudice and aggression, even in the most unexpected circumstances. After revealing her identity as an FBI agent, the atmosphere in the parking lot changed completely. The tension that had filled the air moments ago was replaced by a sense of reflection. The officer stood there, still trying to process what had just happened while she maintained her calm demeanor. She had asserted authority without aggression, but her presence and words had made it clear that the situation would not be ignored or taken lightly. The bystanders, who had been watching silently, began to whisper among themselves, their expressions a mix of awe and curiosity. They had witnessed an ordinary afternoon transform into a moment of accountability, a public display of courage and composure. She noticed their attention, but she did not seek it. Her focus remained on the officer and the task at hand, ensuring that the interaction ended professionally, safely, and with accountability intact. She took a deliberate step back, creating space between herself and the officer, signaling the conclusion of the immediate confrontation. Her movements were calm and controlled, a reflection of the training and experience that had prepared her for situations like this. She did not rush, did not show fear, and did not allow the situation to dictate her actions. Instead, she set the pace, demonstrating that authority was not about loud words or intimidation, but about composure, clarity, and respect. The officer, still trying to regain some semblance of confidence, cleared his throat and spoke hesitantly. I understand. I didn't realize the seriousness of..." His voice trailed off, and he struggled to find the right words. She listened patiently, allowing him to speak, knowing that forcing the conversation would not have the same effect. The lesson needed to be absorbed voluntarily, and her calm authority had created the perfect environment for that to happen. She spoke again, her tone even and measured. It is important to recognize the impact of your actions, especially when they are influenced by assumptions or biases. Accountability is not a punishment. It is a responsibility. Every person in a position of authority must be aware of the consequences of their behavior. Her words were clear, precise, and professional, designed to instruct rather than humiliate. She had learned that real authority came from guidance, not fear. The officer nodded slowly, his posture relaxing slightly as he absorbed her message. There was a subtle shift in his demeanor, an acknowledgement that he had underestimated her and that his behavior had been inappropriate. He was beginning to internalize the lesson, not through confrontation but through observation and reflection. This was the kind of impact she had hoped to achieve, a lasting understanding of accountability and respect. She glanced around the parking lot, noting the people who had witnessed the interaction. Their presence was a reminder of the broader implications of public encounters like this one. Actions and words have weight, and those who witness them are affected consciously or unconsciously. She understood that her composure and professionalism had provided a powerful example of how to handle conflict with dignity and intelligence. Taking another step back, she addressed the officer one final time. "I will submit a report of this encounter to ensure proper review. It is essential that we all learn from situations like this. Awareness and respect are not optional. They are necessary." Her voice carried authority without aggression, clarity without condescension. She had maintained control throughout the encounter, and now she was ensuring that the lesson extended beyond the immediate moment. The officer, now visibly subdued, nodded in acknowledgement. He had been confronted with a reality he could not ignore, and he understood in a way that words alone could not convey, that his behavior had been inappropriate. The quiet power of her presence had replaced his attempts at intimidation, and he was left with a sense of reflection that would likely stay with him long after the encounter ended. She turned slightly toward her car, her movements calm and deliberate. She remained aware of her surroundings, noting every detail, every small gesture, and every glance. Her training had taught her to observe continuously, to anticipate potential risks, and to maintain control through awareness and preparation. She had executed these principles flawlessly, and the outcome reflected her skill and composure. The officer took a small step back, giving her space as she approached her car. His hands were no longer clenched, his posture relaxed, and his voice subdued. He seemed to recognize silently that the encounter had been a lesson in humility and accountability. She had demonstrated that true authority is not about aggression or fear, but about calm presence, clarity, and professional conduct. As she opened the door to her car, she took one last look at the officer, offering a slight nod of acknowledgement. It was a gesture of professionalism, not triumph. She had not sought to humiliate or shame. She had sought to assert authority, ensure accountability, and maintain safety. The nod was a quiet affirmation that the encounter was concluded on her terms, with dignity and tact for both parties. The bystanders continued to watch, some whispering, others simply observing in silence. They had witnessed a moment that was both ordinary and extraordinary, an encounter that could have escalated into conflict, but instead had demonstrated the power of composure, intelligence, and professional authority. She had handled the situation with skill, and her actions left a lasting impression on those who saw them. She slipped into her car, the engine starting smoothly, the quiet hum of the vehicle a stark contrast to the tension that had filled the air moments earlier. As she drove away, she reflected on the encounter, understanding that it was a reminder of the challenges that still exist in everyday life. Prejudice and assumptions can appear anywhere, even in seemingly mundane settings, and the response to such behavior requires calm, clarity, and professionalism. The officer remained in the parking lot, a subtle shift in his demeanor signaling the impact of the encounter. He had been confronted not with aggression or anger, but with calm authority and intelligence. The lesson had been delivered effectively, and the presence of bystanders reinforced the public accountability inherent in such interactions. It was a quiet yet powerful demonstration of responsibility and reflection. As the streets returned to their usual rhythm, she drove with a sense of satisfaction in her professionalism. She had maintained control, documented the encounter, and ensured that accountability would follow. The experience was a reminder that true authority does not rely on intimidation or fear, but on composure, observation, and the courage to stand firm in the face of prejudice. Throughout the drive, she thought about the broader implications of the encounter. It was not just a personal victory. It was a demonstration of how to navigate complex social dynamics with intelligence and integrity. Every detail mattered: her posture, her words, her tone, and her awareness. These elements combined to create a presence that could command respect without aggression. The day continued, but the impact of the encounter lingered. She understood that her actions had sent a message not only to the officer, but also to those who had witnessed the interaction. Respect, awareness, and accountability are principles that extend beyond any single moment, and she had embodied them in a way that was both natural and effective. She parked her car later, her thoughts still on the encounter. She knew that situations like this would arise again in various forms and settings. The key was always composure, clarity, and the ability to assert authority calmly and effectively. She had demonstrated this principle today, and it had worked. The officer had learned a lesson, and the public had witnessed an example of how to respond to prejudice with intelligence and dignity. The city moved around her, unaware of the subtle victories that had occurred in its quiet corners, but she carried the knowledge that professionalism, awareness, and courage could make a difference. It was a quiet power, one that did not need recognition or applause, but one that left a lasting impact nonetheless. The encounter had ended, but the lesson and the example would continue, a testament to the effectiveness of calm authority and professional integrity. As the day went on, the woman continued with her routine, though the events of the afternoon lingered in her mind. The encounter with the officer had been tense, but it had also been a reminder of the importance of composure, awareness, and professional integrity. She had turned a potentially dangerous situation into a moment of accountability and quiet authority, and the lessons from it would stay with her, just as the impression she left on others would remain. She reflected on how quickly assumptions can form, and how dangerous they can be if left unchecked. The officer had acted out of bias, assuming that his position gave him power over her. He had misjudged her entirely, believing that intimidation would work. Yet she had demonstrated that strength does not always come from force or loudness. True strength, she realized, came from clarity, calmness, and the confidence to stand firm in the face of prejudice. Her training had prepared her for moments like this, but her principles and experience had guided her through it with grace. Later, she walked down the streets she often frequented, the sun still warm on her face. People moved around her, living their lives unaware of the small but meaningful battles that had taken place that day. She thought about how everyday life could contain moments of tension and challenge, and how essential it was to handle them with care and awareness. Prejudice and assumptions existed everywhere, but responding with intelligence and integrity could change the course of events. As she stopped at a cafe, she reflected further. She realized that encounters like these were opportunities for subtle lessons. The officer had learned, perhaps for the first time, that his assumptions could lead him astray. By remaining calm and professional, she had demonstrated not only authority but also the power of patience, awareness, and quiet strength. The lesson extended beyond him. It was a reminder for anyone who witnessed it that respect and accountability are essential in every interaction. She sipped her coffee slowly, enjoying the warmth and the normalcy of the moment. She thought about the importance of maintaining balance even in stressful situations. Emotions can cloud judgment, and reaction without reflection can escalate tensions. Her approach had been measured: observe, assess, act with clarity, and maintain composure. That combination had allowed her to assert authority effectively while minimizing risk. It was a reminder that true control does not require aggression, but comes from self-awareness and professionalism. She thought about the bystanders who had witnessed the encounter. Their silent observations had made the experience public in a subtle way, adding a layer of accountability.